I adjusted the hem of my black cocktail dress, smoothing out invisible wrinkles as I stood in the corner of the Grand Ballroom at the Westbrook Hotel. All around me, executives from Harrison and Price International mingled, their laughter echoing off marble floors and crystal chandeliers. 20 years I'd attended this annual company gala, but tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't just Olivia Barrett, executive assistant to CEO Alexander Price. Tonight, I was the woman who owned their future. They just didn't know it yet. Olivia. Alexander's voice boomed across the room. Come here, darling. Tell everyone your little story. I turned slowly, maintaining the same pleasant, unassuming smile I perfected over 2 decades of managing his calendar, his meetings, and his secrets. Alexander stood with a group of board members, his face flushed from too much expensive scotch. She's been with the company forever, he announced as I approached. Started as a temp, right, Olivia? 23 years ago, I confirmed quietly. And now look at her, he gestured expansively. Executive assistant to the CEO. It's like a fairy tale. The group chuckled indulgently. I noticed Richard Cooper, our CFO, checking his watch. He'd never approved of Alexander's tendency to parade me around at company events like some sort of success story mascot. Tell them about your investment, Alexander prodded, his voice carrying just a bit too far. The one that made you a millionaire. Ah, there it was. The real reason he called me over. 3 months ago, I'd purchased a vacation home in the Hamptons. The news had spread through the office like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know how a secretary, even an executive secretary, could afford such a purchase. Just lucky timing in the market, I said modestly. Lucky. Alexander laughed. See, she's just a secretary who got lucky. Probably read some hot tip in one of those women's magazines. More laughter. Even Richard Cooper cracked a smile. What's important, Alexander continued, clapping a hand on my shoulder, is that she knows her place. Don't you, Olivia? I met his eyes steadily. I always have, Alexander. He missed the edge in my voice, but I saw Richard Cooper's smile fade slightly. He was sharper than the others, always had been. Maybe that's why he'd been the only one to notice when I'd started buying company shares 7 years ago. Small amounts at first, nothing to raise alarms. A few hundred shares here, 1,000 there. Always through different brokers, different accounts. I'd learned about hiding paper trails from the best. I'd been covering Alexander's tracks for years after all. Another drink, Olivia? Alexander offered, already turning away, dismissing me from his little court. No, thank you, I replied. I should check on the catering. He waved me off, already launching into another story. I retreated to my corner, pulling out my phone. A message from my broker glowed on the screen. Final transfer complete. Congratulations, Ms. Barrett. You now own 51% of Harrison and Price International. I allowed myself a small smile. 7 years of careful planning. 7 years of reinvesting every penny, leveraging every bit of market intelligence I'd gleaned from typing Alexander's emails, sitting in on his calls, organizing his meetings. The same access he'd taken for granted had given me everything I needed to build my position. Quite a party, a quiet voice said beside me. I turned to find Margaret Wells, our head of legal, studying me with curious eyes. You seem deep in thought. Just tired, I replied. It's been a long week. She nodded slowly. I imagine it has, especially with the Peterson merger falling apart. I kept my face carefully neutral. The Peterson deal had been Alexander's pet project for months. What no one knew was that I'd been the one to quietly tip off Peterson's board about Alexander's plans to strip their assets and lay off their entire research division. These things happen, I said mildly. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. She'd always been too perceptive for her own good. You know, Olivia, I've been reviewing some interesting trading patterns lately. Large blocks of shares being bought through various shells and holding companies. Very sophisticated stuff. I met her gaze calmly. Sounds fascinating. It is, she agreed. Almost as fascinating as how a secretary managed to buy a $3 million beach house. Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew our attention. Janet Chin, head of our Asian operations, was arriving late, and she wasn't alone. With her was Marcus Peterson himself, CEO of Peterson Technologies. Alexander's face went pale. He started pushing through the crowd toward them. But Marcus held up a hand. Don't bother, Alexander, he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. I'm not here to talk to you. I'm here to meet the person who really controls Harrison and Price now. Every head in the room turned, looking for some unknown power player. I felt Margaret stiffen beside me as realization dawned in her eyes. "It's you, isn't it?" she whispered. I handed her my empty champagne glass. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I believe I have a meeting to attend." As I walked across that ballroom floor, 2 decades of being underestimated, overlooked, and condescended to fell away with each step. The whispers started as people began to understand what was happening. By the time I reached Marcus Peterson, Alexander's face had moved past pale and straight into gray. "Miss Barrett," Marcus said warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for warning us about the hostile takeover attempt. I believe we have much to discuss about a more equitable merger arrangement." "My pleasure," I replied, shaking his hand. "Shall we use the private dining room?" I had it prepared just in case. Alexander found his voice then. What is this? Olivia, what are you doing?" I turned to face him, dropping the deferential mask I'd worn for so long. "Taking my place, Alexander, just like you always said I should." The room erupted in chaos. Board members pulled out phones, frantically calling lawyers and brokers. Richard Cooper slumped against the bar, looking like he might be sick. And Alexander just stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. In a way, he was. Margaret appeared at my elbow, her legal mind already racing ahead. "The quarterly board meeting is next week," she said quietly. "I assume you'll want to make some changes to the voting structure." I nodded. "Among other things, I think it's time Harrison and Price had some fresh perspectives in leadership." And Alexander. I glanced at my longtime boss, still frozen in shock. "I believe he's overdue for retirement. Don't worry, I'll write him a lovely recommendation letter. After all, I've been writing all his other correspondence for years." Marcus Peterson chuckled beside me. "Shall we discuss that merger?" "Of course," I said, gesturing toward the private dining room. "After you." As we walked away, I heard Alexander's voice, small and confused. But she's just the secretary." I paused at the dining room door, looking back at him one last time. "No, Alexander, I was never just a secretary. You just never bothered to look past the title." The door closed behind us with a soft click, leaving the chaos of the ballroom behind. 23 years of playing the perfect assistant, and in one night, everything had changed. Well, not everything. I still had to order the catering for next week's board meeting, but this time, I'd be sitting at the head of the table. As I took my seat across from Marcus Peterson, I pulled out my phone and sent one final message to my broker: "Begin phase 2. The real work was just beginning. After all, I hadn't spent 7 years building my position just to maintain the status quo. Harrison and Price was about to undergo some major changes. And this time, I wouldn't be taking the minutes. I'd be calling the shots. The morning after the gala, I arrived at Harrison and Price's headquarters at exactly 7:00 a.m., just as I had for the past 23 years. The security guard did a double take when I stepped out of a chauffeur-driven Mercedes instead of my usual modest sedan. "Morning, Miss Barrett," he stammered, quickly opening the door. Ma'am, Olivia is still fine, George," I said kindly. After all, he'd been the one who'd always saved me a parking spot close to the building on late nights when I was the last to leave, long after Alexander had gone home. The lobby was already buzzing with nervous energy. News travels fast in corporate America, and the events of last night's gala had spread like wildfire. Junior executives huddled in corners, whispering behind coffee cups. Administrative assistants traded wide-eyed looks as I passed. I walked to the executive elevator, the one I'd never been allowed to use despite managing the access list for 2 decades. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the polished steel. Same elegant blazer and pencil skirt I always wore, but today they were Chanel instead of department store brands. Small changes, just enough to signal that the rules had shifted. Alexander's office, my office now, was dark when I arrived. His secretary Janet's desk was empty too. On any other Monday, I'd be at my old desk outside, preparing his schedule, screening his calls, making his coffee just the way he liked it. Instead, I used my key, the one he never knew I had, to unlock his door. The room still smelled of his cologne and stale cigar smoke. I walked to his desk, running my fingers along the polished mahogany. How many times had I stood here, taking notes while he held court. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Peterson, Wall Street Journal, running the story in 30 minutes. Ready? I smiled, settling into the leather chair. Ready. At 7:45 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before the markets opened, the story broke. Breaking. Harrison and Price International undergoes shocking leadership change. Secret majority shareholder revealed as CEO's former secretary. My phone exploded with notifications. First came the panicked texts from board members, then emails from shareholders, then calls from every major news outlet in the country. At 8 o'clock a.m. sharp, Alexander burst into the office, face red with rage. He stopped short when he saw me in his chair. "Get out," he snarled. "This is my office." I didn't move. "Actually, Alexander, this is the CEO's office, and according to the bylaws you never bothered to read carefully, the majority shareholder has the right to appoint the CEO. Would you like to see the paperwork?" "This is impossible," he spluttered. "You're nothing but a—" "Choose your next words very carefully," I cut in, my voice silk over steel. "They might be your last ones as an employee of this company." He deflated slightly, sinking into one of the visitor chairs, the same ones I'd selected years ago when we renovated the office. "How?" he whispered. "How did you do this?" I leaned forward, folding my hands on the desk. "Do you remember the Miller acquisition in 2016? He frowned. "Of course. One of our biggest deals." "Do you remember who found the discrepancy in their financials? The one that let us negotiate the price down by 40%? "I did," he said automatically. I raised an eyebrow. "No, Alexander. I did. Just like I found the hidden value in their Asian subsidiaries that tripled our return on investment. Just like I spotted the patent infringement in their European operations that you used to pressure their board." Understanding began to dawn in his eyes. "For 23 years, I continued, I've watched you take credit for other people's work. I've covered up your mistakes, fixed your errors, and made you look brilliant. And every step of the way, I was learning. About business, about strategy, about power." "But the shares," he started. "Remember all those insider trading investigations you barely escaped? The ones where the evidence mysteriously disappeared? Well, let's just say I learned a lot about hiding paper trails." A knock at the door interrupted us. Margaret Wells entered, carrying a thick folder. "The board is assembling for an emergency meeting," she announced, "and the SEC would like to verify the share transfers." "Everything's in order," I assured her, standing up. Alexander was just leaving, for good. He stood shakily. "You can't do this. I built this company." "No," I corrected him. "You inherited this company from your father, and then you nearly ran it into the ground with your ego and short-sighted leadership. Now you can either leave quietly with a generous severance package, or I can have security escort you out while I read aloud from the file I keep on your creative accounting practices." The fight went out of him all at once. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office that had been his entire identity for so long. I looked at Margaret. "Shall we?" She nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "The board is waiting, and they're terrified." "Good," I said, gathering my tablet. "They should be." The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 men and 1 woman, all wearing expressions ranging from shock to outrage to fear. Richard Cooper, our CFO, looked like he hadn't slept. "Good morning," I said pleasantly, taking my seat at the head of the table. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." "This is the regular." Thomas Wellington, our longest-serving board member, sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can and I have." I cut him off. "Now we can waste time arguing about it, or we can discuss the Peterson merger and our new direction for the Asian markets. Your choice." Richard Cooper cleared his throat. "I've reviewed the share transfers. They're legitimate. Ms. Barrett has been accumulating her position for years, all through legal channels." "Thank you, Richard," I said. "Now let's talk about the future. I've prepared a detailed presentation on our 5-year strategy." I pulled up the first slide, a comprehensive analysis of our market position that I'd spent years developing while sitting quietly in the corner of these same board meetings, officially just there to take notes. For the next 2 hours, I laid out my vision: expansion into emerging markets, investment in sustainable technologies, a complete overhaul of our corporate culture. By the time I finished, even Thomas Wellington had stopped protesting and started taking notes. One more thing, I said as the meeting wound down. Effective immediately, we're implementing a company-wide policy review. Pay equity, promotion practices, harassment policies. Everything. Margaret will be heading up the task force. That could be expensive, Richard cautioned. So is losing talent because we're stuck in the 1950s, I countered. Speaking of which, Janet Anderson from the mailroom has a master's in supply chain management. Promote her to operations immediately and find out who else we've been overlooking. As the board filed out, Margaret stayed behind. The Wall Street Journal wants an interview, she said, and Forbes is already talking about featuring you in their next issue. I shook my head. First things first, get me the personnel files for every administrative assistant, secretary, and support staff member in the company. I want to know who else has been hiding their light under a bushel. She smiled. Already done. There's a data analyst in accounting who's been working as a clerk for 3 years. PhD from MIT, and a former management consultant working in reception because she needed flexible hours for her kids. Promote them both, I said. And Margaret? Thank you for keeping my secret all these months. She shrugged. I knew something was coming when I traced those share purchases. I just didn't know what. Besides, it's about time someone shook up the boys' club. By the end of the week, Harrison and Price was transformed. Alexander's old guard was gone, replaced by a diverse team of leaders chosen for talent rather than connections. The Peterson merger was proceeding smoothly, with both companies' stock prices soaring. And me? I kept my old assistant's desk outside the CEO's office. Not to work at it, but as a reminder. Every morning when I walked past it, I thought about all the other just secretaries out there, watching and waiting for their moment. The following Monday, I called my first all-company meeting. Standing at the podium, looking out at thousands of faces, I thought about that night at the gala when Alexander had told me to know my place. For too long, I began, this company has wasted its most valuable resource, its people. We've overlooked talent because it didn't come in the package we expected. We've dismissed wisdom because it came from the wrong desk. That ends today. I paused, making eye contact with Janet from the mailroom, now wearing a crisp suit in her role as operations director. From now on, there is no just anything at Harrison and Price. No just secretaries. No just clerks. No just assistants. There are only people, talented, ambitious, worthy people. And if anyone tells you to know your place, remember this. Your place is wherever your talent and hard work can take you. The applause was deafening. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I found a gift on my desk. It was my old nameplate from when I was Alexander's secretary, but someone had modified it. Under my name, in elegant script, were the words, "Never just anything." I placed it on my desk, right next to my CEO nameplate. A reminder that power doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman sitting in a corner, taking notes, watching, waiting, and building an empire in silence. The next morning, the Wall Street Journal ran another story. Harrison and Price stock hits all-time high under new leadership. Below the headline was a photo of me at my old assistant's desk, now displayed prominently in my office. The caption read, Olivia Barrett, CEO, from taking notes to taking control. I smiled, remembering Alexander's words from the gala. Yes, I had gotten lucky, but luck had nothing to do with what came next. That was all strategy, patience, and the power of being underestimated. After all, I wasn't just a secretary who got lucky. I was a CEO who got smart. And this was only the beginning.
The key felt heavy in my palm, its brass surface gleaming under the reception hall lights. Patricia, my new mother-in-law, beamed at us with an enthusiasm that seemed slightly forced. "Consider it my wedding gift to you both," she said, pressing the key into my hand. "The house is yours now. I'm starting fresh in Florida." My husband Michael stared at his mother. "What? You're moving? When were you going to tell me?" "I'm telling you now, darling." She smoothed her silk dress, avoiding his eyes. "The papers are already signed on my new condo. I leave tomorrow morning." Tomorrow, our wedding day, and she drops this bomb. But that was Patricia Chin, always doing things her own way. Consequences be damned. "Mom, this is crazy." The house has been in our family for generations. And now it's yours." She smiled that enigmatic smile I'd never quite trusted. "Just be careful in the attic. Some things are better left undisturbed." Before either of us could respond, she disappeared into the crowd of wedding guests, leaving us holding a key and more questions than answers. "Well," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "at least we don't have to house hunt." Michael didn't laugh. He was still staring after his mother, his face troubled. "Something's not right, Sarah. She's been acting strange ever since we got engaged." He wasn't wrong. Patricia had always been difficult, polite but distant with me, protective of Michael to the point of possessiveness. But lately, she'd been different, distracted, almost nervous. "Let's check out the house tomorrow," I suggested, "after she leaves." Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe we'll find some answers there." We should have known it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing with Patricia ever was. The next morning, we pulled up to the familiar Victorian house where Michael had grown up. It stood 3 stories tall, its gray-blue paint weathered, but elegant, wraparound porch still graceful despite needing repairs. I'd always loved this house, even if Patricia's presence had made visits somewhat tense. "Her card's gone," Michael noted, pulling into the driveway. "She really did leave." The house key slid into the lock smoothly, but something felt off the moment we stepped inside. The furniture was gone. All of it. The antique tables, the Persian rugs, the oil paintings that had hung on these walls for decades. Even the curtains had been removed, leaving empty windows staring at us like vacant eyes. "What the hell?" Michael moved from room to room, his footsteps echoing. "She took everything." Not quite everything, I realized, following him. The built-in bookshelves in the study still held their volumes. The kitchen cabinets contained dishes and cookware, but anything valuable, anything personal, had vanished. "Look," I called from the dining room. A single envelope lay on the built-in buffet, Michael's name written in Patricia's elegant hand. He ripped it open, reading aloud. "Dearest Michael, by now you've discovered the house is empty. I've donated most of the furniture to charity. You and Sarah will want to make the space your own anyway. Everything important is safely in Florida with me. The house is yours, free and clear. The deed is being sent to your lawyer. Please don't try to contact me for a while. I need time. All my love, Mom." "Time for what?" Michael crumpled the letter. "What is she running from?" I had no answer. We spent the next hour exploring the house, finding more questions than answers. Every closet emptied, every drawer cleared. Even Michael's childhood bedroom had been stripped bare. Then we reached the attic door. "Be careful in the attic." I remembered Patricia's warning. Some things are better left undisturbed. Michael's jaw tightened. "I'm tired of her cryptic games." He pulled the cord, and the attic stairs creaked down. The space was mostly empty, dust motes dancing in the light from the small window. A few boxes remained, labeled in faded marker. Christmas decorations, old papers, family photos. And there, in the far corner, a small wooden chest I'd never seen before. "That's new," Michael said, frowning, "or old, but I've never seen it before." We approached together, leather shoes leaving prints in the dust. The chest was made of dark wood, intricate carvings decorating its surface. No lock, just a simple brass latch. Inside, we found only one item: a leather-bound diary, its pages yellow with age. June 15, 1992. I read from the first page. Today, I made a choice that will haunt me forever, but I had no choice. The truth would destroy everything. Michael's face went pale. That's the year I was born. My hands trembled as I turned the page, reading further. The baby isn't his. George can never know. He's so happy, already planning the nursery, picking out names. How can I tell him that one mistake, one night of weakness, means the child he's so excited about isn't actually his? I'll take this secret to my grave. No one can ever know that Michael's real father is... Stop. Michael's voice cracked. I can't. I need air. He stumbled toward the attic stairs, leaving me holding the diary that had just shattered his world. George Chen had died when Michael was 12, a heart attack at his law office. He'd been, by all accounts, a devoted father who doted on his only son. Michael had grown up believing he was exactly like his father. Same analytical mind, same dedication to justice that had led him to become a prosecutor. But if the diary was true, I followed Michael downstairs, found him sitting on the porch steps, head in his hands. It could be a fake, I offered. Some kind of bizarre mind game. He laughed bitterly. You know my mother. She doesn't do anything without a reason. He looked up at me, eyes red. All these years, everything I thought I knew about myself. I sat beside him, taking his hand. This doesn't change who you are. Doesn't it? My whole life, I've tried to live up to my father's legacy, to make him proud. And now you're still the same person you were yesterday, the same man I married, the same dedicated prosecutor who fights for justice. He squeezed my hand but said nothing. Back in the attic, I read more of the diary while Michael paced the dusty floors. Patricia's words painted a picture of a troubled marriage, a moment of weakness with a colleague, the devastating realization of pregnancy. She'd convinced herself telling the truth would destroy her family, so she buried it deep. But there was more. August 3, 1992. Robert keeps calling. Says he has a right to know about his child. I've told him to stay away, that the baby is George's, but he won't listen. Says he'll tell George himself if I don't. I'm terrified. Robert? Michael stopped pacing. Robert who? I turned more pages, scanning entries. Wait. Here. September 1992. Robert Matthews finally agreed to stay away. The money helped. Nearly emptied my trust fund, but it was worth it to protect my family. He signed papers giving up any claim to the baby. Matthews? Michael's face went even paler. Not Judge Robert Matthews? I looked up sharply. The one you clerked for after law school. He nodded slowly. He took a special interest in my career. Mentored me. Said he saw something of himself in me. His laugh was hollow. I guess now I know why. The pieces were falling into place. Patricia's increasing anxiety as Michael's career brought him into contact with Judge Matthews. Her sudden decision to leave town just as Matthews was retiring and moving back to the area. There's more, I said quietly, still reading. She writes about watching you and Judge Matthews together during your clerkship. How guilty she felt seeing the connection between you, knowing she was the only one who understood why. Stop. Michael's voice was raw. I can't. I need to process this. We left the diary in the attic, locked up the empty house, and drove home in silence. What should have been our first day as newlyweds instead felt heavy with secrets and lies. That evening, as we sat in our apartment surrounded by wedding gifts we hadn't opened yet, Michael finally spoke. I'm going to confront her. I looked up from the thank you note I'd been pretending to write. Are you sure? I need answers. Real ones. Not just what's in that diary. He pulled out his phone. Her new address has to be on the deed paperwork, right? Michael? Wait. I covered his hand with mine. Maybe we should take some time. Think this through. I've had a lifetime of lies. I'm done waiting. But when he called his lawyer, we hit our first obstacle. The deed hadn't been filed yet. No paperwork had been submitted at all. What do you mean? No paperwork? Michael demanded. She said it was all handled. More calls followed. Patricia's phone was disconnected. The realtor who'd supposedly handled her Florida condo purchase didn't exist. Every lead we followed evaporated like smoke. She's running, Michael realized. But from what? Or who? I thought about the diary entries, the mentions of Robert Matthews, the timing of everything. When does Judge Matthews officially retire? I asked. Next week. There's a big retirement party. Michael's eyes widened. You think she's afraid he'll finally tell the truth? Or that you'll figure it out yourself, now that you'll be seeing more of him socially instead of just professionally? Michael was already reaching for his keys. We need to talk to him. Now. It's almost midnight. I don't care. I need answers. I couldn't argue with the desperation in his voice. Within minutes, we were in the car, heading toward the affluent suburb where Judge Robert Matthews lived. The house was dark when we arrived, no cars in the circular driveway. Maybe this isn't such a good idea, I started to say, but Michael was already out of the car, striding toward the front door. Before he could ring the bell, a voice called from the darkness. I wondered when you'd come. We both spun around. Judge Matthews stepped out of the shadows by the garage, still wearing his court suit despite the late hour. Your mother called, he said quietly. Told me about the diary. Michael's hands clenched into fists. So it's true? The judge nodded slowly. You can see it, can't you? The resemblance? Everyone always said you looked just like George. But he gestured to his own face, the same strong jaw, the same deep-set eyes that I suddenly realized Michael shared. Why didn't you ever tell me? Your mother made me promise, said it would destroy your relationship with George, with the whole Chen family. And she was right. George was a better father than I could have been. That wasn't your choice to make. Michael's voice shook with anger. Either of you. No, Matthews agreed. It wasn't. But we thought we were protecting you. Protecting me? By lying to me my entire life. A car turned onto the street, headlights sweeping across us. Matthews stepped back into the shadows. Not here, he said urgently. Come inside. There's more you need to know. We followed him into the house, into a study lined with law books and framed photographs. And there, on his desk, sat an identical diary to the one we'd found in Patricia's attic. She wasn't the only one who kept records. Matthews said quietly, Sit down, Michael. This is going to be a long night. Judge Matthews pulled his own diary from the desk drawer, its leather binding worn with age. Before I show you this, you need to understand something. Your mother isn't just running from the truth about your parentage. She's running from something much worse. Michael sat rigid in the leather armchair, his face a mask of controlled emotion. What could be worse than lying to me my entire life? Matthews sighed heavily. The night you were conceived, it wasn't just a simple affair. Your mother came to my office late one evening, distraught. George had discovered some discrepancies in the family trust accounts. Money missing, unexplained transfers. He was planning to launch an investigation. What does this have to do with anything? Michael demanded. Everything. Matthews opened his diary. Your mother was embezzling from the family trust. Had been for years, covering her tracks with fake investments, doctored statements. George was close to discovering it all. She came to me for legal advice. One thing led to another. He shook his head. But that's not the worst part. I reached for Michael's hand, felt it trembling in mine. When George confronted her about the missing money, Matthews continued. She panicked. Told him she'd discovered one of his law partners was stealing from client accounts, that she'd been gathering evidence. She forged documents to frame him. The partner was disbarred, went to prison, committed suicide 6 months later. Michael stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. No, you're lying. I wish I was. Matthews pulled a file from his desk. Here's the proof. The original documents, the evidence of her forgeries. I kept it all, telling myself it was protection in case she ever tried to deny my connection to you. But really, I was just a coward, unwilling to face what I'd helped cover up. I watched the color drain from Michael's face as he read through the file. As a prosecutor, he dealt with evidence of crimes every day. He knew authentic documents from forgeries. And these were real. Dad's heart attack, he said numbly. It wasn't just stress from work, was it? Matthews looked away. George had finally figured it out. All of it. The embezzlement, the frame job, your true parentage. He confronted Patricia that morning. She claims he clutched his chest and collapsed before she could explain. But what? There was an empty bottle of heart medication in his desk. The prescription had just been filled the day before. The implications hung heavy in the air. Michael swayed slightly, and I guided him back to sit down. She killed him, he whispered. My mother killed my father. It was never proven, Matthews said quietly. The police ruled it natural causes. No autopsy was performed. But George's secretary later told me he'd been planning to go to the authorities that day. About everything. And you kept this secret? For 20 years? Michael's voice rose. You're a judge. You're supposed to uphold justice. I know. Matthew's shoulders sat. By the time I learned the full truth, years had passed. The statute of limitations on the embezzlement had expired. There was no way to prove anything about George's death. And you were thriving. Top of your class in law school, following in George's footsteps. I told myself revealing the truth would only destroy your life. Like you destroyed that other man's life. The partner who went to prison? Matthews flinched. I didn't know about that part until later. Much later. Patricia was very good at hiding things. Until now. I spoke for the first time. Why is she running now? Because of this. Matthews pulled up a news article on his computer. Thomas Chin is returning from Hong Kong next week. George's brother. He never believed the embezzlement story, never stopped investigating, and he's finally found proof. Records of where the money went, evidence of the forgeries. He's planning to present it all to the firm's board of directors. Michael leaned forward to read the article. Thomas Chin, international finance expert, returning to take over leadership of the family law firm. The firm where Michael had been offered a partnership position just last month. She knew, Michael said. She knew Uncle Thomas would expose everything. That's why she gave us the house, disappeared to Florida. She's probably not even in Florida, is she? Matthews shook his head. She cleaned out her accounts last week. Bought a ticket to the Cayman Islands. No extradition treaty. I have to stop her. Michael pulled out his phone. Already tried, Matthews said. Her flight left 3 hours ago. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my new husband struggle to process the avalanche of revelations. His mother a thief, and possibly a murderer. His biological father a coward who helped cover it up. His whole life built on an elaborate framework of lies. "What are you going to do?" I asked softly. Michael stared at the file in his hands, proof of his mother's crimes, of the innocent man she'd framed. Documents that could reopen old cases, restore a dead man's reputation, possibly even trigger a new investigation into George Chen's death. "The right thing," he said finally. "What Dad, what George, would have done. I'm taking this to the authorities." Matthews started to protest, but Michael cut him off. "You don't get a say in this, either of you. You've done enough damage." We left Matthews' house as dawn was breaking, the file heavy in Michael's briefcase. He was quiet on the drive home, his face set in lines of determination I recognized from his toughest cases. "You know this will change everything," I said gently. "Your career, your position at the firm." "I know, but I can't be part of covering up these lies anymore." He glanced at me. "I understand if you want to. Don't you dare finish that sentence." I grabbed his hand. "I married you yesterday, remember? For better or worse. This definitely qualifies as worse, but we'll face it together." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I don't deserve you. Too bad. You're stuck with me." The next few weeks were a blur of investigators, depositions, and headlines. Michael turned everything over to the state attorney general's office, recusing himself from any involvement due to conflict of interest. The evidence was overwhelming, not just the documents from Matthews, but the diary from the attic, financial records Thomas Chen had uncovered, and eventually testimony from Matthews himself. Patricia was arrested trying to board a yacht in the Caymans. Apparently, her plan to escape hadn't been quite as foolproof as she'd thought. She refused to speak to Michael, sending only a brief note through her lawyer. "I did it all for you." "She still doesn't understand," Michael said, crumpling the note. "Everything she did, all the lives she destroyed, it was never for me. It was all for herself." The partner she'd framed was posthumously exonerated. His family received a substantial settlement from the firm. Thomas Chen made sure of that. Judge Matthews resigned before he could be impeached, avoiding criminal charges in exchange for his testimony. Michael couldn't bring himself to forgive the man, but he understood the choice to cooperate. Sometimes justice requires hard compromises. As for us, well, we never did move into the Victorian house. Too many ghosts, too many lies embedded in those walls. We sold it and bought a small place of our own, somewhere we could build new memories untainted by the past. Michael left the firm, started his own practice specializing in financial crimes and wrongful convictions, using his knowledge of how corruption works to fight it instead of hiding from it. I've never been prouder of him. The diary that started it all still sits in a box in our closet. Sometimes I catch Michael staring at it, like he's trying to understand how his whole life could have been built on such an elaborate deception. "You know what I think?" I told him one night, about a year after everything happened. "I think George knew about you being Matthew's biological son. I mean, he had to have noticed the resemblance. But he chose to be your father anyway, chose to love you and raise you to believe in justice and truth. That's what made him your real father, not DNA, but choice." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "You really think so?" "I do, and I think he'd be proud of what you did, of choosing truth over lies, justice over family loyalty. You're his son in all the ways that matter." Patricia was sentenced to 15 years for the embezzlement and fraud. The investigation into George's death was reopened, but there wasn't enough evidence to prove anything beyond reasonable doubt. Some mysteries remain unsolved. 2 years after our wedding day, we finally had the celebration we should have had then, a renewal of vows, surrounded by true family and friends. Thomas Chen stood in as Michael's best man. Matthews wasn't invited. As we exchanged rings again, I looked at my husband, this man who had faced the destruction of everything he thought he knew about himself and emerged stronger, more committed to truth and justice than ever. For better or worse, I repeated, meaning it even more now than the first time. For truth and justice, he added with a small smile. And love, I finished. Always love. Because in the end, that's what saves us, not the lies we tell to protect ourselves, but the truth we face together, and the love that helps us survive it. The Victorian house was eventually torn down, replaced by a community center that offers free legal aid to those who need it most. Michael volunteers there sometimes, helping people navigate the complex legal system that once helped hide his mother's crimes. Life has a way of coming full circle sometimes. Last week, we found out I'm pregnant. Sitting in the doctor's office, looking at the ultrasound, Michael squeezed my hand. "No secrets," he said quietly. "We tell them everything, age appropriate of course, but no lies." "No lies," I agreed. "Just love. Because that's the real legacy we want to pass on. Not money or property or even a prestigious family name, but the simple, powerful truth that love combined with honesty is stronger than any convenient lie. The key Patricia gave us at our wedding sits in a frame on our wall now, not as a reminder of what we lost, but of what we found. The courage to face truth, the strength to choose justice, and the love that makes it all worthwhile. Sometimes the most valuable wedding gifts aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they come disguised as disasters, as revelations that shatter our world. But if we're brave enough to face them, to build something new from the ruins of what we thought we knew, they can lead us to exactly where we need to be. Michael keeps a picture of George on his desk, not because of biology or obligation, but because of choice. Because every day, he chooses to honor the man who taught him about justice and integrity, who loved him enough to keep loving him, even knowing the truth. That's the thing about family. Real family. It's not about blood, or DNA, or even shared history. It's about the choices we make every day, to love and support each other, to fight for what's right, to face hard truths together. The house key led us to truth. The truth led us to justice. And justice, somehow, led us home. Not to a Victorian mansion full of secrets, but to each other, and to the kind of love that's strong enough to survive any revelation. Sometimes that's all the legacy we need.